Hey, Great Lakes, good to be here with you. I feel privileged to be invited to come and spend time this way with you. And I hope what we talk about today, my sessions at least, that they'll be encouraging and helpful to the situation we find ourselves. And let's be fair, the situation we find ourselves in right now is one of increasingly challenging times in the university and therefore for us as campus pastors. You know, times of cultural shift are always times that are unsettling, they're times that are confusing, but they're also times that tempt people in various ways. And so I want to talk about some of that. You know, you're getting ready, soon you'll be headed back for your campuses, but most of them, if not all of them, will be much more open. And you go with great hearts, you go with great vision and hope for the well-being of human beings. And so I think it's understandable if you're in a situation, it'd even be shocking to have our desire to engage with students with essential, really critical, as the theme is for our time, critical questions and conversations about life, and then to suddenly be met by a potpourri of highly sensitized emotions and opinions that can quickly digress into anything from personal accusation, denunciation of you as a human being, the attempt to see your group closed down, etc. All of this on the bullhorn of social media platforms. It's understandable that we begin to feel sensitive, like walking on eggs, or maybe a better metaphor is walking through a beautiful field only to find out that there's all kinds of emotional landmines that have been planted that you are unaware of. And so here we are. Question that we're addressing for this light is, where do we go? How do we have crucial conversations? Well, others will speak to this and address this as well as myself, but my assignment for this session is to ponder a question. And the question that I was given to ponder is, how does one in times like these gain and retain a sensitive heart when dealing with highly sensitive people in a sensitive environment like the university? That is to say, putting this question another way, how do we retain the heart of Jesus in the midst of a broken world, and particularly the world of the university? How do we have a pliable, a welcoming, a patient, and I think a risking heart where everything is hypersensitized? Now, the heart of what we do, of course, is we work with words. And the focal point, the fulcrum issue about words is that they trigger. And this idea of triggering leads to a cancel culture, it leads to the suppression of ideas, etc. And so we're really in a mess, as you well know. And so I'm going to try and suggest two things that I think are interrelated, as you'll see, two things that are essential to pursue. And then finally, I'll talk after that about a path that leads to doing both these things well. So the first thing, I want to underline that times like these call us to keep our heads in every situation. Now, you're familiar with your Bible, so you know that's dear brother Paul talking to young Timothy in his second letter and telling him, Timothy, above all, keep hold of your head, right? And so the atmosphere Timothy finds himself in the first century is not all that different than the situation we find ourselves in. Technology is really different and the process of communication, but the actual environment for him is one that produces temptations for him. He lives in an environment where he's perceived as being young, according to the general culture. He has to address people about words that are and are not to be spoken. He needs to protect certain things that are essential to the well-being, critically important to the well-being of human life. And so I think the first takeaway that I would encourage you to do some thinking about, maybe conversations with your staff, and it would be this: we would be unwise and unprepared if we, one, did not identify the kinds of temptations that each of us individually on our teams feel vulnerable to. And the second one is, if we can name those things, then it weakens its power over us. I think awareness of a thing in my life is about 75% of my battle to come to terms with it. And so if I can be aware of where I'm vulnerable, if I can name the vulnerability, it may be different than yours. You may have a different list, but together if we can, then as teams working together, we can better know how to pray and better know how to go forward in wisdom and in a way that doesn't create as many errors. Excuse me. So Paul's priority is set out for Timothy in 2 Timothy 4:5. He says that Timothy is not to give in to the temptation to freak out. That is, he says, do not lose your head. Keep your head in every situation. Now, you know, the tendency to freak out seems to be a part of the culture right now. Everything is a crisis, right? Well, so I recommend the reading by Marie Antoinette, It's Not Good to Lose Your Head. That we need to be thoughtful and intellectually self-controlled. And that means that there's things that have to be at work. We have to know when to be silent, but not be tempted into silence. We need to know when to withdraw and when to press forward in the work we're called to. We need to know when to identify and then speak into our temptations, but we also need to know when silence is in fact golden. Paul says he's to do this keeping of the head in the midst of engaging in all of his ministerial duties. And again, the primary heart of our ministerial duties is to have critical conversations about Jesus, about the life questions that students are facing, about the real nature of reality, and all that goes with that in a culture now that is in a significant place of denial and simply not even want to talk about such things. So, number one, keep your head. Secondly, these times also call for us to carefully attend to our hearts. Now, I said the two have to come together, and they come together because in Proverbs 4:23, we read this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do and say flows from it. Now here, the kardia, the heart in the Greek language, it's a complicated thing. We normally think of the heart, of course, as the seat of our emotions. You know, it's the core of our feelings, our perceptions of desire, our fears, etc. And this is true here, the way the author of Proverbs, the wisdom father, is speaking to his son. But it's more than that. Most of you are probably aware it's the center also of our thinking, our intellect. So it's not just emotion, it's intellect interacting with emotion. It's our thoughts and our perceptions. And critically, it's the place of our attitudes. And then the third aspect of heart in this text is that it's the center of your will. That is, it has to do with your finite freedom, the choices that you and I make, the actions we bring into the day-by-day observable world that we live in. And so the wisdom father says to his son, son, above all else, guard your heart because everything of substance issues from it. You know, knowing that the heart then is the engine of my being in the world, from which all of my actions, all of my words, all the attitudes and emotions and choices that I make, they all flow from that. It's not surprising how often, I was struck with this as I was preparing, how often Jesus speaks about the condition of human beings in terms of their heart. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, if you just went to one book of the New Testament, one book of the Gospels, Jesus points out the problem of people's hearts 5 times in the Gospel. And if you go and read them, he will cover every group that's there. It's his disciples who have stubborn hearts. It's the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, that have a hardened, resistant heart. It's the crowds who follow him for all the wrong reasons that he says have a heart that isn't welcoming to truth. And so basically, the hardening of the heart is a universal challenge. And what that says to me is this word is for me. As a pastor, as a campus missionary, I need to be aware of the hardening of my heart, which also interfaces with I need to keep my head. And so to guard the heart, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean kind of a, seeking, introverted kind of life. That's a type of escapism. What the Father's talking about here, and the way I think it's important for us, is it means to be diligent. Maybe it's like the attentive watchman of Ezekiel who stands in care of the city that he loves or the village that he loves, and he keeps himself or herself attentive. Or it's like the good shepherd, if you don't like the watchman metaphor, the shepherd who, when he puts his sheep into some type of fold, safety place, he lays his own life down in the doorway to it. That they have to go, it's that business. You're going to have to go through me to get to them. Or maybe something more familiar to me, at least, is every place when I go to get my auto parts, there is this fierce, faithful junkyard dog there. And it is watching over the master's treasures. That's what it means. It means to look out of love like the watchman. It means to throw your life down for the sake of the sheep like the shepherd. And it means to have some fierce and faithful protection of what the master calls valuable. I'm to be wide awake then. I'm to catch the deceptive, subtle thoughts that run through me before they lead to destructive words and actions. And in the situation we're in, a slip of the word, so to speak, can have much larger reaction than any of us would find rational. But nevertheless, we live in that kind of super sensitized moment. On my journey with Jesus, these 2 words, the word about keeping my head and keeping guard over my heart, have been like a great big beware sign, neon sign flashing. It's been a great help to say, Lord, make me attentive to my head and my heart, that I could walk well in your way. So there's these 2 essential things we must do. But what is the path that leads to both? Actually, I think we probably all know it. This would be a reminder for us more than, whoa, I've just never ever thought about that. We must follow the way of Jesus. That's fundamental to what we say we are. We are Jesus people following the new way of life in him. And where does that way of life lead that can shape the heart and the mind in the settings that we're in, the situations that tempt us? In Henry Nouwen's book, Out of Solitude, which I can't recommend highly enough to you, the formative text in Nouwen's reflections on solitude comes from Mark 1:35. And here it says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and, having put aside his cell phones and his pads, left the house and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Now, I wish the Greek actually said that, because sacred solitude is a place that we get that's far enough away from other people and the technological things at hand for us, as good as they may be. A downside is that they can interrupt us at all kinds of times, day and night, with the noise of life. Jesus went off where the noise ceased, even if it was good and affirming noise, and went to a place where he could be in sacred solitude. It's a place, if we stay long enough and give the Spirit time to engage us, they will actually hear the voice of the Spirit begin to speak to us about the areas of temptation for us, the areas of uncertainty, the areas where there's a distortion that's percolating in my mind or emotions and influencing my choices. But I've found, and I'm sure you found too, that you can't do this in a 5-minute quiet time, that we're going to have a kind of rethinking of what it means to be a part in a culture that is so intensely active and in the same time so sensitive. It's a place, in my mind, where Jesus stayed long enough also, and we need to do this as well, to hear God's voice of embracing love for us. Because most of our temptations revolve around our sense of insecurity or the place of not knowing how deeply we belong to God. And so this place of solitude becomes a place of shaping my mind, shaping my heart. It becomes the power that can remake and then send me out with clarity in the backdrop of my mind, that I'm hearing the voice of God even as I walk around, and that voice can give me guidance in the moment toward wisdom in how to speak, if to speak, and what to speak. So the sacred place is a place where we are in conversation with the Spirit to give us the faith and the boldness to do the work of God, but to do it wisely. And so with those three things, keep your head, watch over your heart, follow the path of Jesus into the place of sacred solitude. Let me close with a couple of stories, okay? Background story for the second story. Part of my degree, my BA in secondary education, was I majored in speech communications and theater, and then had a literature major as well. But, in speech communications and theater, I think perhaps that's why I've always been so wonderfully drawn in and captivated by the stories of Jesus' dramatic encounters with people. Stories where Jesus has crucial conversations that happened in stressful and sensitive environments. In particular, right now I'm thinking about John chapter 8, 1 through 11. Famous story about the woman caught red-handed, so to speak, in adultery. She's brought to Jesus by the teachers of the Mosaic law, and a conversation ensues. This conversation all of a sudden throws Jesus into a situation, perhaps unexpected, very sensitive, and an explosively dangerous environment. The players are Jesus, the disciples are there, they're in the temple grounds, there's a crowd around them listening, and the teachers of the law, Moses, come and interface with Jesus in the midst of this watching community. The question is asked of Jesus. Should they do what Moses allowed? Should this woman be stoned? Now, the objective is not actually to fulfill the law of Moses in righteousness or to rid Israel of some problem woman. The real issue here, as we're told in the story, is that they were seeking to trap Jesus and put him in opposition to Moses, and by that undercut his message, who he was as a rabbi and what his message is. So high stakes for the woman as well, to say the least. High stakes for the rabbis teaching the law of Moses in their position of authority and significance. High stakes for the crowd who make decisions off what they hear in the moment of a situation like this, and could do that as well with us, in the moment to hear something we say and to make a decision from it. How will Jesus answer? Well, he remains silent. And he messes in the dirt with his finger. He's writing something. I've heard all kinds of sermons telling me what he wrote. Actually, nobody knows what he wrote. In fact, I'm inclined to think that what he was doing, messing in the dirt, is not the point. I think he was practicing proverbial wisdom, that issue of thinking and holding your head in a moment of awareness, of watching your heart, giving space in order to act then with great wisdom. This may have come much easier for Jesus than to us. There's an understatement of the day. But nevertheless, we see that he's slow to speak. He's listened. He's playing it out. And then when he does speak, he speaks with great clarity. But before he can say anything, the teachers begin to press him to give an answer. And so Jesus gives an answer. He says, all right, go ahead. But let the one that first condemns her to death by throwing a rock at her head, let that one be the one who has not sinned and needed forgiveness. All of a sudden, he changes the whole atmosphere with this question. And of course, we read, and it's interesting, that from the oldest to the youngest, all of the teachers of Moses wander away from the situation and the confrontation. At that point, Jesus is back playing in the dirt while they're making up their minds about rock throwing. Jesus' silence is then broken when they have left, and he says to the woman, where are those who would condemn you? And she says, none have condemned me. Then neither do I condemn you. And he sends her off on her path. Jesus sends her off, and as she leaves, she hears this strikingly gentle, firm, wise, probing word. Go on your path, Jesus says, but leave your path of sin behind you. What a haunting word to carry, that the one who saved her from death and did not shame her before the crowd commanded her to walk in a new way of life. And so this story has been profoundly helpful in my life. It's mentored my heart and my mind as I think about my own engagements in the open spaces of campus and in any place we're gathered together. Okay? So, story about Brady and my wife Shirley, my beloved Shirls, on the road with Jesus. The setting is a quick stop at our favorite drive-through coffee spot in Bellingham on a trip out of town. The players in our drama is a new barista that we'd never seen before, and three of us in the car, Shirley, myself, and the Trinity. I realize that makes more than three, but you know what I'm trying to say. The dialogue ensues. The barista says to us through the ordering window, what can I get for you? And we order. I tell her what Shirley wants, and then I order mine somewhat specific. I'd like a 16-ounce skinny mocha, sugar-free, fat-free, half sweet, no foam, whip, or fluff, and extra hot, please. The barista, college-age gal, goes to work. Then Shirley asked me, did you remember to tell her I wanted mine extra hot too? And so I couldn't remember if I told her the wonders of growing older. And so I have to interrupt the barista as she's doing her work and the hissing and all of the coffee machine. And so I say rather loudly, young lady, I was just wondering. And then, of course, I can call her young lady because I'm an old grandpa. And I said, I'm just wondering, did I tell you that my wife's should be extra hot as well? By this time, the barista's dropped her work, come back to the ordering window, looking at me, and she affirms that, yes, indeed, I had remembered to tell her that. And then she forcefully, with a slight peevish tone, said, I would appreciate it if you would not call me young lady. I don't identify myself as a woman nor as a man. I'm gender fluid, so please don't use that description for me. And she turned back to her work. There was a clear tension in the air all around us. What does it mean to watch my heart? What does it mean to keep my head? What does it mean that John, the story in John, came to mind at that time? I caught, though, things about my body language. My looking over at Shirley with kind of a shake of my head, rolling my eyes. And I can remember some of the words that were going through my thought process. You know, words like, whoa, sensitive, or snowflake, or you've got to be kidding, or can we just follow the science? All kinds of little quips from walking in the world. But then the story began to take hold. And I had to ask myself, who am I to this barista? Why, I'm a total stranger. But I looked down and became aware that I was wearing my CCF shirt, my Campus Christian Fellowship, which is the name of our Chi Alpha at Western. It's one of those great big bold print shirts. I looked like a sitting billboard. It would not have been able to be missed that I'm part of this thing. She couldn't have failed to understand the advertisement that I was saying that I'm a Jesus person and that I was representing him, that my views to her would be his views, that my words and attitudes would be his words and attitudes. You know, she was college age. In fact, all the baristas at this little place, other than the owner, were all WWU students. And I began to think, I've thought about it in this brief moment that I had, that here I have now imprinted on her mind a tone and attitude in her interpretation, and it's tied into the name of our group. And anybody that would ever talk to her and say, hey, would you come to CCF? Or, oh, I'm part of CCF. All of a sudden, I've entangled my whole community in whatever I do and say. Well, fortunately, I had time to think for a minute, kind of speed pray, which works a lot better than speed dating, by the way. I had time to remember that if I speak, I was to speak as the very voice of God, as Peter says in his first epistle. I was to speak like my Lord. I was to ask and weigh, what, if anything, should I now say? I concluded that silence is not golden in the situation that I found myself in, more like a gonging thud. And so when the barista returned with our order, we paid, and then I said something very close to the following. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I didn't mean in any way to offend. This is our first time for us to meet you and you us. And I'm wondering if in the future when we come, if you would be comfortable with me calling you or Shirley calling you by your name. She paused, and then she said, yes, that would be fine. Great, I said. So what is your name? And she says, my name is Wren. In the coming weeks, we would be served by Wren a number of times. She was, in fact, a WWU student. We learned not only that she was a student there, but we discovered what she was studying, her hopes and dreams about the world. We learned about her motorcycle love. We had chances to talk to her about her life, always addressing her as Wren. We never had a come to Jesus moment, but we did have the opportunity to sow word seeds that we pray and hope were kind of a haunting awareness that the caricatures that she may have picked up from media or friends, that somehow this older Christian couple would be a countermeasure to that. Here was a couple who lived and spoke, who apologized, who sought to know her not as a thing, not as a movement, not as an identity, but as Wren. We saw her in her humanity, and it gave us wisdom in how to talk. So, what do we do to retain a sensitive heart? We retain a clear mind, and we pray and seek the Spirit's help to have a soft heart in a hard-hearted culture. We find our sacred space and make it our own. We once again humble ourselves to learn at the Master's feet. We let his words and his Spirit search our hearts, finding the attitudes, the fears, and the reactions that could distort our speech in the public square. And then we strive to remain thoughtful in every situation, slow to speak, quick to listen, always listening for that still small voice of the Spirit that gladly gives us wisdom beyond our years. And when we do speak, we pray even as we speak, that we might in fact speak the very heart and mind of God. For out of the heart, the mouth does speak. Thank you.